Yes. All right, teammates. It looks like we're live. It's almost 4 p.m. Hello, Miss Leslie. That's awesome. And John, you are amazing. Still like to get a phone call with you here in the next day or two when you have a chance. But thank you for being here. Thank everybody for being here on a Saturday afternoon. I know this is a bit of a challenge time. I've been trying to do two things. One, I've been trying to pick different times so that different folks would have the opportunity to sign in, because I know people work different shifts and they work different times. They have different family needs and family requirements, and so and then also I was busy. Good news for all of us that are on this ride together. Thank you, Alice. For all of us that are on this ride together, the good news is I've been very busy this week. I've had several interviews and a couple of town halls. Polk County Republican Committee was very professional, very gracious, reached out, made sure I knew about their town hall, and invited me to participate on Wednesday. And then Young Republicans invited us on Thursday. And then today I was at as you can see, I'm out in the woods where I like to be. I'm camping in order to work counties and try to let folks know that I'm out here without having to drive home. And I enjoy camping out here with my dog. He's not sitting next to me tonight. Hello, Julie. He's down at the campsite. I had to come up to the top of the hill because there's no connection down there in the campsite. So I'm out here working in Guthrie County, and I here because one of the local farmers had invited me out, and I've been at his house since 9 this morning, butchering hogs and doing some other work, and it was just an awesome day. So I like doing lots of things. So here we go. 4 p.m. on Saturday. We're looking at when the next one will be. I might try a early morning one on Tuesday, and we'll make that decision here soon, and hopefully hit again some folks with different shifts, and then maybe Thursday or Friday we'll go back to the evening. Quick introduction once again, Bill Schaefer here, seeking the honor of each of you selecting me to be your representative, your next representative for District 3, trying to get the nomination here in this primary season that we're already in. Folks are voting by mail as we speak, and the primary will be held in person on the 2nd, and sometime on the 2nd we'll know that we will be going after the Democrat that's in our seat to get it back. I'm an Army background. I'm an Army brat, they call it. My father was in the Army, moved around a lot. I met my wife in my father's last duty assignment, which was Maryland. We've been married for 36 years. We have 3 wonderful adult children that are all self-sufficient. Great Americans. One's a store manager, one's a teacher. She's up here with me right now, but soon to head back to San Antonio, Texas, where she teaches. And our son is in Tucson, Arizona, working on a doctoral program. I was in the Army for 32 years, and then worked for the Army as a civilian for just under 5 years as a human resources guy. In the Army, I was a infantryman, infantry officer on active duty for 30 years of that service, and retired as a colonel. As I've said, that's important for you to know, not because I was in the Army, but because of the experiences. I think if you look at the jobs I had in the Pentagon, where I was responsible for briefing training issues to the 4 vice chiefs of each of the services, when I was a brigade commander down at El Paso, Texas, responsible for about 2,000 folks that worked directly for me, and responsible for the training of about 15,000 National Guardsmen and reservists who were soon to deploy overseas and in harm's way. And our job was to make sure they met the readiness gates. And then I came to Iowa. The Army brought me to Iowa, Rock Island Arsenal, where I was the operations officer and chief of staff for a 3-star headquarters. And that 3-star headquarters, the higher headquarters of the brigade that I was in, was responsible for all of the continental United States readiness for National Guard and reservists. So it was certainly a great assignment, and I think what it tells you, or what I hope it tells you, is the strategic planning, the policy writing, the senior level experiences I had that will translate themselves well to solving problems for you in Congress. So what all that also means to you, I'm an Army family. My family is spread out across the country. That is an experience of its own, but we're very proud of that service. And the Army delivered me to Iowa, and when we retired, we were working for the Army, and my wife and I just came to the conclusion that with our family spread out, and we like Iowa, we like Iowans, we like the conservative nature of this state. I'm an outdoors kind of guy, as you can see, and so Iowa's got great outdoors, so we decided to make Iowa our home, and that's what we've done. And so we're retired to Iowa, and we're staying. So that's my background. I got scuffed up by a couple of great people that are on tonight about condensing the intro just a little bit. I hate to do it every time, but I know there are new people on, and I'm going to leave it there in terms of intro and offer it up for questions. But please, if any of you have questions about my background, ask. I think if you ask anybody that's been following me, you'll be told that you'll get an answer from me if you ask a question. So I'm ready to go. We got quite a few folks on, and hopefully my outdoor battery is going to last me long enough. Listen, we're gonna call this 1 hour today, and so at 5 o'clock, unless we've got a whole series of questions, I'm gonna thank you all again and let everybody get back to their afternoon. I am very honored that each and every one of you would spend your afternoon with me. So this is very important. I think it's very important. That's why I'm doing this. Oh, I got questions and I didn't know it. All right. Oh, okay, Ken. We need to talk, and I'm in Guthrie County right now, so we could probably figure out a link up. We'll get it done. So let me write that down. Ken Ledrina. Okay. Robert Haxton. Robert, thanks for being on. Please share with your friends that. Oh yeah, it is nice. It's very nice. It's been threatening rain all day, Leslie, but we're doing great. You know, Ken says that I should consider that members of the military have taken ownership of this country and that services their tax payment. You know, I don't know if I'll do that, Ken, and there's two reasons. Well, first, if you did it, you would have to have grades of that. You know, if a great American, signed in for 3 years, did his duty honorably and left, do we think that he has earned a tax exemption rather than a 20-year veteran or a soldier that went to combat and got wounded? And so there would be a tough way to get a balance. But I'm going to tell you, I have a very strong feeling on balancing the budget and a very strong feeling that everybody should be paying taxes. Frankly, I have an idea that even if you receive a welfare check, taxes should be taken out of it just so that you can see the impact that your local businesses are taking. So I'm not sure I'll do that, but I'll write it down and we will study that. Next question comment is thank you for your service. You were a combat veteran, and where did you serve in combat, and could you elaborate a little bit more on your 2 Bronze Stars? Thank you for asking that question. So these questions for me, they're always hard to talk about. Listen, I'll talk about the combat service first, and then I'll talk about awards. I was a captain in 1990 when we were alerted to go to war. I was in Germany, and had just recently taken command of an infantry company, a mechanized infantry company, and with the 3rd Armored Division. And so we deployed through Saudi Arabia and into Iraq for Desert Storm. And so I spent 6 months. I spent the air war in Saudi Arabia, and then I spent the 100 hours that you've all read about and heard about, the 100-hour war. in combat with the Iraqi Army. And that was, typical Army stuff, 100 hours of no sleep. And on the other end of it, the Iraqi Army surrendered, and then we took up blocking positions and security positions, and I spent the next several months, kind of an interesting story, protecting some folks in a place called Safwan. It's a real garden spot. A garden spot that I believe hit about 130 before we left. And those folks, the borders are much more clear on a map than they are in most of the world. And most of the world governments see borders. Many of them see them less clearly than Americans do, or anybody in Europe, or even Russians or Chinese. But in the Middle East and places in Africa, the borders are not so clear, and they're not clear at all to people that are out in those parts of the world. So there was a little town called Safwan, and they were in such a bad place that after the war was over, they were in danger, and Kuwaitis saw them as Iraqis, and Iraqis saw them as Kuwaitis, so they couldn't turn in either direction without getting shot at. And so we put in a security position around that town and protected them until we could get everything settled down and got it all straight. We actually shipped some of them out to another country that was gracious enough to provide them some refugee land. And then we were fortunate enough to be able to return to a lot of gracious Americans thanking us. Fast forward about 17 years or so, 20 years maybe, 21 I guess, and I was commanding an infantry battalion in 3rd Infantry Division, and I was alerted to go to war. Actually, when I left for that war, I was working as a G3 officer, an operations officer, assistant operations officer for the division commander, and I ended up bumping around the country by myself for a while. Spent some time with an SF team for a couple of weeks, and some time with a interesting foreign group of Army. Spent some time with the Marines planning some operations in some other divisions, and then I took command of the battalion in combat and spent 9, almost 10 months running operations between Baghdad and Tikrit and Kirkuk, Iraq. Again, another garden spot. And so the second half of the question is about my Bronze Stars for Valor, and there's always a challenge there with soldiers because you don't put yourself in for award, and so it's hard to describe why you received an award. But I did in fact receive a Bronze Star for Valor as a company commander and as a battalion commander, so twice. And in both cases, those were not a specific action. They were a series of action over time that my division commander and my brigade commander thought rose to the level of valor worthy of being submitted for that award. So that's that. Thank you for asking that question. If that's not clear enough, please ask again, and I'll try to provide more detail. But again, a series of events over a period of time in both cases. Okay, how do you feel about your ability to bring Democrats and independents? And that's another great opportunity. I stumbled on that question in a town hall the other night, and actually I think it was intended to be a gotcha question at the time. But it is important because as you're making this decision, as you're talking to your friends about making this decision about who should be our representative on June 2nd, who should go against Cindy Axne and remove her from office, the question isn't who can get all the Republican votes at that point. It's who can fire people up and convince them that they are what they say they are and bring additional people to the table. Listen, team, I am very confident that I will bring a message of constitutional problem solving and this constitutional federal republic to independents and even a few Democrats and bring them to the vote, because I have seen the logic of that conversation with even some Democrats recently, that if we first solve the level of responsibility, before we argue about whether you see policy this way or I see it that way, then you can see the wrong direction of the country and the destruction of our federal republic. And so I'm confident that that will bring a lot of folks to the table. I'm also very confident that everybody out there on this Facebook tonight that's been listening and eager to help me will in addition bring the fire up from Iowans to get out to vote. I mean, if you think about it, I don't have a single paid staff person. I've got nothing but you. And in the last week, I haven't had I almost said a free hour. I have not had a free day. There goes a truck. And that's because of you folks. You're talking to your friends, you're talking to your neighbors. I'm getting phone calls and text messages and invitations, and that's what's going to fire people up. So I'm very confident we're going to do that, and I think the general election is going to be, it is definitely ours for the taking. What is the reason you identify as pro-life? So, I mean, that's a one-sentence answer. I believe life. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe that life is a gift from God, and I don't believe that man has the right to kill that life in the womb. That's it. The expanded answer on my pro-life stance is I like to talk with equal strength and conviction about my concern for the mental and physical health of the mother, whatever stress they're going through, but at the same time make sure that we are caring for the preborn child. So, Bob, I hope that answers your question. Again, if it doesn't, please jump on again. Hi, Danny. How are you? How do you think your state, district, or even country could do a better job caring for the homeless in our communities? Do you think some coming over our borders might feel trapped, that they aren't welcome here, but are oppressed where they are asked to go back? As a Christian nation, do you personally feel we should do all possible to show brotherly love? Well, I'm going to probably have a less than perfect answer for you because, yes, my level of compassion for individuals is very high. I've been in plenty of places where I've been able to demonstrate that compassion, places that break your heart, and I did my best for those individuals. But I also didn't pick them up and place them in somebody else's home. And so, no, I don't think it's okay for folks to walk across our border illegally for any reason. But the more direct answer to your question about homeless, or let me change that word, the direct answer to your question about the homeless is, I truly don't believe that's a federal level issue. That's one of those topics. This is a federal republic. Why do we want the federal government from Washington, D.C. trying to figure out how to deal with the homeless in a city? Homelessness is first a city problem, and then second a state problem. And if we as a nation make that adjustment, we will solve that problem better. And those of us that are impacted by the solution, the taxpayers and residents of that state, will be better able to deal with our state and state senators, state representatives, and our governors, or our city mayors about that, about that issue. So that's my first answer. Get the federal government out of the homelessness issue and allow that to be states and local communities and even preferably leaning heavily on charitable organizations and allow people that choose to contribute their wealth to that. Yes, you make it a very hard question by the Christian nation and the brotherly love comment, and it does make it very difficult for me. But as your federal representative, as a person that spent his life in national security, in order for them to receive that brotherly love, they have to come through legally. And there is legal channels for refugee status and for oppressed folks. And the worldwide accepted legality of that is you go to the First Nation that is able to take care of you. You don't pass through nations just to get to the one that has the most welfare system. So brotherly love in that particular case is diametrically opposed to first being concerned for American citizens. So I hope that's clear for you and not too disappointing to you, but that's how I feel about those two problems. Okay. All right, somebody help me out here. I don't want to repeat something from last week. Leslie, you didn't quit on me, did you? Thanks for asking. I'm a big fan of Candace Owens, a young black conservative woman who advocates against black America hiding behind racism and a victim mentality. How do you feel about the labeling of unjust racism? Probably just as strongly as you. I find the current state of racism to be very concerning. I think we went backwards for several years, and you can kind of all guess which years I'm talking about. I think our media and our progressive politicians do a huge disservice to all of us when they put us in groups and pit us against each other, regardless of what the group is. Color, skin color, sex, it doesn't matter. And when you're pitted into a group just so a politician can pander for your votes, that's bad for our health. The ability thank you, Leslie. The ability for folks to throw racism on the table for every time. I mean, really, they threw racism on the table, a couple of them, for this virus. It is bad for the health of our country. And Candace Owens is absolutely a strong voice as a young conservative black woman against that. And there are several. And what we need to do, rather than emphasizing their color, is just emphasize their skills and their professionalism, and encourage more to continue to join us as a country, as a single people that has a federal republic. And again, if we do that, think about it. If our federally elected representatives, congressmen, senators, the president, if they're not talking about race, then your race issue becomes local. Much easier to solve, because at that point, the folks that are feeling like there's racism are talking to the elected officials in their towns that can see firsthand what that might be. So yeah, I think it's bad for us, and we can hopefully get some reduction in that as we go forward. And I do see positive changes in that in the last couple of years to some degree. I really love these. My daughter had to beat on me to get me started on these Facebook Lives, and the virus was actually, as sad as it was fortuitous for me, because it forced me to agree with her and do this. And the time moves through these rapidly, getting the chance to talk. I just wish it was voiced sometimes, so that I could hear the passion in y'all's voice on these questions. Yeah, Leslie, you're right. Most racism takes place in the media and the political agenda, and that's exactly what I was talking about, and expressing why that is such a concern to us as a nation. The worst part about it is whether they are really talking about a legitimate race issue or not. I mean, I think most of the time they're not, but occasionally one is real. It's still damaging, because it convinces people that aren't even there. They're 1,000 miles away, but it convinces them that there's racism somewhere, even though they haven't seen it. And that's why I make that point. Get our federal elected politicians out of that conversation, leave it locally, and that way the people that are on the ground will see what's happening, and are being in a position of strength to actually confirm or deny the racism. So the question, why do you think your opponent David Young has been so unsuccessful in previous primary contests, and why are you the better candidate? Well, I don't know that. Here's how I'll answer that. Um, I think that he, in the first time he got elected, he was unable to get himself out where folks could see him and hear him and decide he was the right candidate. And but the state rules being what they were, he was able to convince the delegates that he was the right guy, and so he got legitimately into office. In the next two elections, he really didn't have a significant primary challenge, but in both of those, that brought him to 18, where we lost the seat, and I think that goes right back to 14, where he was unable to put himself out in front of the voting public and encourage the voting public to get out to vote, which is, I think, something our party should do a better job with, letting everybody know who the candidates are, and even creating opportunities like did happen this week. Finally, there's 16 counties, and we had opportunity this week with one of them to talk to them. So, and then when you look for information and when you seek the positions, at least I believe, and this is the contrast between the two of us, besides our background, which is a significantly different contrast, and topics like the Second Amendment, the Constitution in general, and pro-life, securing the border, the ability to look you in the eye and tell you, here's my stance. I don't see that he has that. He doesn't have the conviction of those things. He's trying to figure out where that middle ground is, and that makes sense because that could arguably maximize votes, but it doesn't work for me. I believe there's enough conservatives in Iowa, specifically District 3, that are either Republicans or independents. I believe there's enough constitutional-minded folks and pro-life folks in the Democrat Party that we can fire them up and bring them to voting for this candidate by taking those stances. And listen, if that's not what the voters want, then that's fine, because I'm not going to change. I'm going to keep giving you solid answers, and they're either going to be, here's my exact stance, here's my stance, here's the negotiable topics within that stance or within that topic, that are subordinate to the main topic. And occasionally, I don't know a lot about that. I've got to do some studying. So I take notes and I go back and do some reading on it. Hi, Lynn. So with your strong constitutional stands, how strong of a following do you have in the Libertarian Party? Are they supporting you? I wouldn't claim that they're supporting me or endorsing me or anything like that. I think that would be unfair. They have their own agenda and their own candidate that they intend to run. But I can tell you that I've been asked to speak at the Libertarian Party Central Committee kind of meetings on a couple of occasions. The fellow that is intending to run for this seat in 3rd District has indicated to a lot of folks he has conservative friends, Republicans, and he has Libertarian friends, and he's told them openly that he endorses me, supports me strongly for the Republican nomination. So we'll see where that goes, but I absolutely have communication with several Libertarian folks, and I think a few of them are probably going to register and vote in the primary, but we'll see. Thanks for that question, though. I got to check this and see if somebody's giving me some instructions, because that's usually what happens. My daughter texts me to tell me something's wrong. Okay, I don't know who that is. I'll check that later. All right. Yeah, listen, while I'm waiting, I just keep emphasizing that constitutional stance. I believe that the biggest reason that our country is in trouble in the long run. We've certainly got some big issues right up front in our face. We were dealing with the trade issues with China, and I thought we were going down some pretty good paths under the president's direction with tariffs that I don't normally support, but in this case I think they were strategically being placed. And now we got this virus thing, which, whether you like the answer, like the reactions or not, we are where we are now. We've got some huge economic issues. We've got some huge economic issues for our local businesses. I had a chance to talk about that the other night too. The impact in rural America out here in our small towns is much greater than on the East Coast or in little towns. But the long range 5, 10, 15-year problem that's been building for years and years, a couple decades now, is the dependency on the federal government. And every time we allow the federal government to create another program, whether it's education, whether it's welfare, whether it's dealing with homeless, every time we allow the media and our politicians to look to the president and his party and accuse them of not taking care of an issue, without a single politician that has the gumption to say, hey, wait a minute, before I ask you, hi Jane, thank you. Before I ask you or want to talk to you about that policy, why do we have the federal government involved in it? And that's the damage to our constitutional federal republic that's moving us toward an actual democracy. That's why we have conversations about eliminating the electoral vote, which that right there would kill our constitutional federal republic. It would be the end of it. And we'd be run by a half a dozen cities, not even states. We'd be run by a half a dozen or so cities from now to eternity. And you talk about, a lot of us will talk about the slow movement toward socialism. You eliminate the electoral college, and you will be jumping off the cliff to socialism. And so that is of great importance to me, to fight, to not just preserve our Constitution and our constitutional federal republic, but to push that topic, to push that narrative into the media and into my peers in the Congress and my state and state representatives and senators. Absolutely. Friends, we have a great teammate on that's from a group called Real Conservatives Political Discussions. It's a dynamic group around the country. Origins began in Iowa, and the friend that's on, I believe she's telling me she's originally from Dubuque and Lynn counties, and I believe you're in Massachusetts now, Jane, is that correct? Well, I'm waiting for that. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate, by the way, Bob just said good answer, I'm pro-life, and I really appreciate that. But that's an opportunity for me to also say, listen, I know I'm not going to get 100% agreement with you on every topic. But in the totality of it, the conservative following that we have is pretty powerful, and we're going to win this primary thing. How concerned are you about the state's economy? Oh, Leslie, I'm very concerned about it, and because of the decisions we've made. We are in a position right now where government folks, elected folks, are making. They're doing it with that compassion that you mentioned earlier. They believe they're making compassionate decisions based on a threat to people. And in my mind, when you take the science of leadership and the art of leadership, there's a point where the art of leadership would tell you that the threat to a group of people is not as great as the threat to the entire group. And in this case, there's an immediate threat to some vulnerable population, and I don't want anybody to even get sick, let alone have their family suffer through the passing away of folks. But at the same time, when you put so many restrictions on for such a long period of time, the economy takes a huge hit. And so here you have it. I've got no problem with the bigger stores, but they're all still open. And in all these little towns, little tiny towns of 100 people to a couple thousand, across this district and across Iowa, and really across what the politicians lovingly refer to as flyover country. You've got small stores that don't have the kind of markup, they don't have the kind of liquid resources to sustain themselves for too long, and many of them are shuttering. I'm sure most of you saw an article today from Michigan where a gentleman was, a very strong-looking man, sounding man, but he was weeping because he was shutting his business down after 30 or 40 years because he's been shut for 2 months. That kind of business, the barber shops in town that have 1 or 2 seats, the small bars which are still not open, they don't sit on the kind of money that allows them to be closed for a couple of months. So yes, I'm very concerned with it, and right now there's two parts to that concern. The first concern is how many of those businesses are we going to lose, and then the second concern is, even after they open, are they going to be able to sustain it? I know that restaurants are not opening right now because they can't handle the restrictions that are still on them. Even though they're told they can open, their seating capacity, they have to buy more resources to put sanitizer out and clean the bathrooms more often. And listen, bathrooms being cleaned more often sounds great. I certainly, like anybody, likes a clean bathroom, but that's resources they have to buy. I'm not sure they all have the ability to buy those resources, and so I'm pretty confident that that's why. I've talked to one restaurateur, and I know that's why he's not opening, because he's still working almost 2 weeks later to walk his way through the math of whether or not he can open under the restrictions. I was out in Cass County on Mother's Day, and I looked at Atlantic, pretty large town, city in our district, and I went through 11 restaurants to try to take my wife out for Mother's Day. And let me just suffice it to say, I didn't go get carry out because that's all they had, and we fixed dinner back at the campsite. And we still had a great time, but still, I couldn't even take my wife out for Mother's Day because even though the rule is they can open, none of them were open. Don't like it. What are your priorities after you're sworn in as a freshman? Congressman from Iowa, thank you for the way you asked that question. Listen, I'm going to tell you, the first priority is I'm going to go meet with certain representatives and senators that I believe up to this point, up to this experience that I'm in, that I believe were true conservatives. They sound like strong voices, and I thought they were folks that and I still want to believe that we could trust as conservatives. But the inability to get any of them to talk to me because the party wants to ignore my candidacy makes it a little frustrating. So that's my first priority. The second priority then is to start working on coalitions to increase the effort behind the President's America First agenda. 2 things specifically: border security. That's a national security issue to me. There's 2 parts of it. The security of the border, which includes resourcing the Border Patrol and ICE, and then the elimination of the incentives not allowing illegal aliens to get in line for welfare, for food, for education, or for medical. That's got to stop, or jobs. Those 4 things have to be stopped to stop the incentive of walking across the border. Separate but connected to that would be birthright citizenship. I think needs to be addressed again as a national security, border sovereignty kind of issue. And then I'm going to work on a coalition to start pushing the issue of a balanced budget. There's a couple in there that have talked about it, that have put things on the table, and I'm going to go challenge them and say, if you're serious about this, then you got another voice here. Let's get after it. I hope that's enough for now. If you want me to kind of go through some more, you can trust that as a 32-year veteran caring for infantrymen, and by the way, one of the greatest supporters and caregivers of your soldiers is my wife. She admirably took care of families while we were deployed, and families of wounded soldiers and the like, for that entire time while she was raising my 3 kids to be great Americans. So certainly my compassion for soldiers is going to be high. I will make sure that our veterans are taken care of. And I spent my last 10 years in the Army working with, for, and having worked for me, Guardsmen and Reservists. So they're all part of that plan, and I've got some plans about how to make, how to create paths of, I don't want to say jobs, paths of success for retiring soldiers that start while they're still on active duty, because there's a little bit, I think, of a disjointed thing between still being on active duty but short final to retire before you're an actual veteran, and I think we can shore some things up there, and we'll take a look at some VA medical stuff as well. But so there's several things that would be on the top of my list of things to get done. I read somewhere that when President Trump took office, his plan for deregulation was to eliminate 10 regulations for every one he had to instate. How do you feel about this? Listen, I think that's wonderful. The deregulation at the federal level. Listen, wow, you got me going on a great topic. So there's a couple pieces about regulation. First of all, a lot of great Americans don't realize how much taxes they pay, and you know, we should realize that every time the federal government makes you get a license, get a credential, pay a gas tax or a fine, that's a tax. Well, it doesn't matter what they call the money. If you have to give money to the government, it's a tax. And so that's the problem with those regulations, especially when those regulations come out of the executive branch. The executive branch should have no authority to tax those, whether it's a fine or a license, and they do it all the time. So I like the president's stance. What I would like to of eliminating 10 for any one new one that has to be created. And I know from talking to business folks that those regulations have freed them up largely and created the freedoms that our business owners should have. And I think that's wonderful. What I want to do to help the president with that is create a more targeted thing, so it's not, and it may be, but that statement there, which I fully support from the president, eliminate 10 for one, isn't specific enough. So what I want to do is be involved in the targeting of regulations and learning from business owners in our district, great representatives like John Jacobson and Brad Zahn on what kind of regulations at the federal level impact them, so that I can actually target regulations that are included in that eliminate 10. What point of extreme overreach of states on citizen rights do you feel the federal government should step in? I'm not sure the answer to that. I don't think the federal government should be overreaching into the rights of citizens at all, and I think the federal government has made that mistake, or we've allowed them to make that mistake many times. If I'm reading the question incorrectly, you might mean something like our rights are being violated by the illegal aliens violating the sovereignty in this country, and the federal government should absolutely step in. So I guess the way to answer your question is, if there is a violation of the Constitution, that is a federal level responsibility to step in. So the Constitution lays out the federal government's job, right? And national security being one, border security, border sovereignty is part of national security. So anything that's illegally here, anybody that's in this country as a guest that violates U.S. citizens' rights, that should be stepped in by the federal government. Beyond that, you know, unless the state government or a local government is violating a federal law, I think the federal government should stay in D.C. and let our states deal with most issues. I'm not sure if I read your question right. Please let me know if I did or if I need to provide clarity. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. Thank you for your service. It is always an honor to have folks thank me for my service, and Iowans are very generous about that. And it's always an opportunity for me also to say I accept some of that thanks, most of that thanks, for my father, who came back from Vietnam and retired in the late 70s, and was never provided quite that thanks. So I share that thanks with him every time I see him, the thanks that I get, and I hope that he feels some of that coming his way. But thank you for the comment. Oh, Scott. Great to see you, John. Thanks for being on. So, Alice, let me know if I read your question wrong or if we did okay on that. Okay, I've lost my video again, so hopefully y'all are hearing me and seeing me. We're at 4:45, and I got another message here. Let me check to make sure I'm not turned off. Is anybody seeing me? I just got a message that something's wrong. Is anybody seeing me or hearing me? Looks not good. Oh, any thoughts? Julie hears me. Okay. So, Julie, I guess you're hearing me. I'm sorry, I'm just checking to make sure. All good, thank you. Okay. Any thoughts on Common Core? Yes, I don't particularly care about Common Core. It's just not a good idea, and the reason is it's a one size fits all solution coming at the wrong level. I feel very strongly that the Department of Education needs to be out of the education business. I've talked about it a few times. I'll repeat it here, that either eliminating the Department of Education is the right answer for the country, or reducing it to a small group of folks who have a forecasting job, because it is true that at the federal level, they should be expected to have the ability to kind of look around the world, gather data, and hire folks of certain educational backgrounds that can analyze and forecast the future. And so they could then provide white papers, is what we called them in the Army, but this information papers that said to the states, here is the forecast over the next 5 or 10 years of the type of stuff that would be beneficial to the country, technical skills, science skills. It doesn't matter what the skills are, but here they are. And then let education go to the states. So and then create a consumer and a business back into education, where teachers are delivering a product to a student and their parent, as long as there's a minor involved. And that's the way our education system should be run. And the students should be vested in their future, and the instructors should be invested in the success of those students. And we can't do that if the federal government is directing Common Core or in any way affecting the educational process by holding or withholding money. Yeah, so I think what the violation of constitutional rights is probably referring to the overreach, specifically relevant to this emergency we have going on. The virus exists. Whether you believe that there was an overreach by the government or not at this point is kind of irrelevant. The question is, have they been violating our rights? And I think that our representatives should have an opinion on that. But remember, our representatives and our senators, the governor doesn't work for them, so they can only have an opinion as an Iowan, not as a federal representative, and they can express that opinion from a little bit stronger perch because they have more direct access to the governor than we do. But they should have an opinion, not necessarily a position or trying to place a demand on the governor. where the government is violating our constitutional rights, the redress for that is the court system, and of course the AG, the Department of Justice potentially has a role, and I do think that they have been, and I think AG Barr has been foreshadowing some efforts to take um, if the governors don't start straightening it out. So I kind of giving you both answers, or not two different answers. I'm giving you an answer from from all three parts of our government, right? All three equal parts of our branches of our government. And that is, the executive branch should be doing what I think the DOJ is doing, foreshadowing or otherwise opining that rights might be violated and we got to do something. And the Supreme Court should be waiting for court cases to be brought through the system and adjudicated on at the lower courts. And our federal senators and congressmen should really just be opining as citizens of that state. Okay. I concur. The point was made that Common Core indoctrinates instead of educates. I absolutely agree with that. I'm not a fan of Common Core, but I wanted to make the strong emphasis that I don't care what they call it. I want the federal government out of it. I don't even care if they come up with a perfect system. I want the federal government out of it. It's not in the Constitution. We don't need them involved. The states can handle it, and the private schools can handle it. Yeah, using Michigan and California, do you think the DOJ needs to step in? Possibly. We certainly don't want to inject the DOJ too soon. Citizens should be creating lawsuits and doing the things to get the attention of the court system. But there might be a point in the very near future where the DOJ needs to do that on behalf of the country, so that we can get an adjudication across the board. And by the way, I'm fully on board with the businesses that are opening up and taking the risk. But that's what it is. It's a risk. What they're basically doing is they're saying, this is unconstitutional. You're violating my constitutional rights, and I'm going to open up. And more power to them. I pray for them every day. I wish them the strength and the resolve and the financial solvency to win those arguments. The preferred answer at that point is that the governors realize they've made a mistake and they back off and they let the business stay open. The next answer is it ends up in the courts, and those folks have to fight their way through the system to get that constitutional decision. And that's where the DOJ can also step in and provide some emphasis. And it might not be a bad idea to get a Supreme Court decision on this, so that we are in a position in the next emergency to neutralize the possibility of governors taking advantage of the precedent that's being set right now. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. People should not be being arrested or fined. All right, great. You're up. Okay. All right. How do you envision the new normal after the dust settles on the fear created by COVID-19 crisis? Would you have voted for the Okay, two-part answer. Absolutely not. The $3 trillion thing is completely ridiculous. I'm not sure I would have voted for the first one, because too many of our elected folks, they added too many things on that had nothing to do with COVID. And I know that's going to be a hard decision. It's going to be a hard line to hold, but I feel very strong that budgeting needs to be balanced, and emergency budgeting needs to be very specific for the emergency. And I don't accept the idea that we got to compromise to get the thing done. That's why we're failing in so many areas. We compromise. We always compromise to the lowest common denominator, the easy path, and I just don't think it's good. Absolutely would not have voted for the $3 trillion thing. It's ridiculous and just filled with political agendas. The new normal, frankly, I'm just completely against it. I want Americans to resist it. I unfortunately watch Facebook every day, and our great teammate Americans, some of them are on there, and they're worried for their own lives or their families' lives, and are suggesting that the new normal of not shaking hands and not wearing masks is going to have to be accepted. And I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea, to be frank with you. I think that trying to protect the human body from all of these potential viruses and other things that enter our immune systems on a daily basis is bad. I think in the long run, it'll weaken our immune system so that we're more susceptible to a lot of things. And in the short run, it removes the warmth of human contact, even the handshake with a stranger, let alone handshakes and hugs with friends and family that you haven't seen in a whole while. I've watched these heartbreaking videos of kids talking to their grandparents through glass doors. That I got to tell you, if I'm a grandparent, I'd rather succumb to a virus in a week or two and be able to see my grandkids. So no, I'm not up for this new normal. I want Americans to fight against it, and the norm needs to just go back to being, great warm Americans and handshaking and that kind of thing. Okay, what are your thoughts on stopping the left's Green New Deal, and how would this most impact Iowans if it were ever to pass? Yeah, I'm more concerned about that than some people. I think that folks read stuff like that and they see it as such an extreme view that they think it's a joke and it'll never happen. And I would remind you, good evening, Shirley. I would remind you that that's where we were 100 years ago, before the federal government got involved in any of our daily lives, before they created Social Security, before they created a welfare state from the federal, guided by the federal level. It's just not good. But if that's what happened 100 years ago, the Green New Deal even being on the topic, and a couple of folks being allowed to talk about it openly like it's a good idea, I think is a huge concern. So, again, that goes back to building that coalition and making sure that we have enough strong conservative, strong-minded individuals that can take positions and not cower to the Speaker of the House or to the Senate Majority Leader or even to the President. I mean, in this case, the President's on our team, but if we get somebody else in there, we don't work for him as representatives. We don't work for the Speaker of the House. We work for you. And so if I tell you that I'm going to go there and stop the new Green Deal, then that's what I need to do. And I have to get enough like-minded conservatives, don't particularly care if they're Republicans or Democrats, conservative-minded folks that think that is just like the elimination of Electoral College, the destruction of the destruction of the Federal Republic. So, of course, if it was to pass, Iowans would be impacted just as great as the rest of the country. I think it'll bankrupt us, to be quite frank. So it's a very big concern. My buddy just put on there new Green Deal equals soft language. I try to talk about that a lot too, and that's true in any of these topics. The soft language of compassion and emotion and new Green Deal, healthcare, women's healthcare issues, all these soft language topics that get people away from the core argument, the core thought on the policy. And at its face value, the problem with the new Green Deal is it's a bunch of pie in the sky. We're just going to do these things. There's no science behind how you get there. There's no science behind the economics of how you get there. There's no science behind the engineering on how to get there. So it can't stand. Government can't legislate science any more than it can legislate behavior. Bad plan. Thank you for helping me with that. Yes, no new normal. Looking close to the House to operate with a quorum of 20. Yeah, okay, that looks. So I saw an article that Pelosi is looking to close the House and operate with a quorum of 20, and having the proxy vote of her party. Yeah, that's very scary, and that's certainly a problem where she can set the rules. So hopefully there's enough Republicans that have the gumption to go there and be a blocking system for that. But I got to watch that. We all have to watch that very closely and make it clear that that's just not acceptable for the Speaker of the House to take that kind of an action. All right, friends, we're moving right in on 5 o'clock, and I will, unless I see a question pop up, I'll end it here. I'm starting to get a little rain anyway, so I probably should get my equipment in out of the rain. Listen, I'm very honored that all of you took the time to spend an afternoon with me on a Saturday. You know, I get concerned every time I change the times to see, you know, if I'm meeting the needs of the individuals. But I can tell you I've seen some new names on here, some old friends as well. And so I think it's not such a bad thing to create new times that other folks can sign in that might otherwise not be able to. Listen, look for a post from me for. I think I'm going to try Tuesday morning and get some folks from different shifts and maybe some homemakers and some other folks that have an opportunity, maybe 8 or 8:30 on Tuesday. If anybody wants to weigh in on that idea through private messaging, that'd be great. And then maybe we'll go with Tuesday or Thursday evening this week, depending on the schedule, how the schedule shakes out. Thank you all again. I am honored that each and every one of you has taken time to look at my candidacy and talk to me via Facebook Live. Remind you that if you want me to come visit you in your little town, anywhere, just get a hold of me, private message. My phone number, 515-850-8100, 515-850-8100, and I will come visit you. I'm going to, I know I'm going to be in Madison County at the end of the week. I'm looking at some opportunities in Council Bluffs the first part of the week, and then I'll be back at the house next weekend, and we'll keep driving on right to the primary. Encourage your friends and family to vote. I hope they all take a look at my candidacy, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is for we the people to pick our candidate. Please encourage your friends and family to vote. God bless each and every one of you. God bless our country, and thank you again for joining me.